The sound of gunfire echoed through the mining camp just as Nora Abbott dropped the 20-pound sack of flour she had been carrying, her knees buckling from exhaustion and hunger that gnawed at her insides like a living thing. It was September 1878 in Trinidad, Colorado, and the rough mining settlement at the edge of town had become her prison for the last 8 months, a place where she cooked 3 meals a day for 40 men and never tasted a single bite herself. She steadied herself against the rough wooden counter of the outdoor kitchen, blinking back the spots that danced across her vision. The miners would be lining up in less than an hour for supper, and she still had biscuits to make, beans to finish, and the venison stew that bubbled in the massive iron pot over the fire. Her stomach cramped painfully, reminding her that she had not eaten in 2 days. But that was the arrangement. Mr. Dutch Calloway, the camp foreman who had hired her after her father died in a cave-in, made it clear that food was for the workers only. She received her wages, a pittance compared to what the men earned, and if she wanted to eat, she could buy her own supplies in town with money she never seemed to have after paying for her tent and basic necessities. The other women in Trinidad had warned her about Calloway, but Nora had been desperate. An 18-year-old woman alone in a mining town had few options, and cooking was the only skill her mother had taught her before consumption took her 5 years earlier. So she had taken the job, believing Calloway's promises that she would be treated fairly. That illusion had shattered within the first week. "You best have that food ready on time, girl," Calloway's nasal voice cut through her thoughts. He stood at the edge of the kitchen area, his narrow face twisted in its perpetual sneer. "The men are complaining that portions have been getting smaller." Nora bit back the retort that wanted to escape. The portions had not changed. Calloway had been skimming supplies and selling them in town for his own profit, but she had learned quickly that speaking up only earned her more work and less pay. "It will be ready, Mr. Calloway," she managed, her voice steady despite the weakness in her limbs. He grunted and walked away, leaving her to her work. She mixed the biscuit dough with practiced efficiency, her hands moving automatically even as her mind drifted. Sometimes, she dreamed of what it would be like to sit down at a table and eat a proper meal, to taste the food she spent all day preparing, to feel full and satisfied instead of this constant gnawing emptiness. The miners began lining up as the sun touched the western peaks, their faces grimy with coal dust and sweat. They were not bad men, most of them, just tired workers who wanted their food in their beds. They barely looked at her as she ladled stew into their bowls and handed out biscuits, their conversations flowing around her as if she were invisible. She was scraping the last of the stew from the pot when she heard it. A commotion at the end of the line, voices rising in surprise and something that sounded like respect, maybe even fear. Nora looked up and felt her breath catch in her throat. The man walking toward the serving area was unlike anyone she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the setting sun behind him. His hair, dark as a raven's wing, fell past his shoulders in waves that looked like they had been tamed only by a leather cord at the nape of his neck. His face was all hard angles and sharp planes, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of beard and eyes that were the color of a winter sky, pale gray and penetrating. But it was his build that truly arrested her attention. His buckskin shirt, open at the collar, revealed a chest thick with muscle, and his arms, visible where the sleeves were pushed up, showed the kind of strength that came from years of hard living in the wilderness. Everything about him spoke of power held in check, of a man who could be dangerous if provoked but chose restraint. "That is Boone Farley," one of the miners whispered to his companion, loud enough for Nora to hear. "Heard he brought down a grizzly with just a knife last spring up in the high country." "What's a mountain man doing in a mining camp?" the other replied. Nora did not have time to wonder about the answer because suddenly those winter-gray eyes were locked on hers, and she felt pinned in place by the intensity of his gaze. He moved through the line with an easy grace that seemed at odds with his massive frame, and when he reached her, he stopped. "Madam," he said, his voice deep and rough like thunder rolling over distant mountains, "I would like some of that stew if there is any left." Yes, of course," Nora stammered, embarrassed by her reaction. She reached for the ladle and realized with sinking dismay that she had already scraped out the last serving for the man before him. "I am sorry. I just gave out the final portion." The mountain man studied her for a long moment, and Nora felt heat rise in her cheeks under his scrutiny. She must look a sight, she knew, with her auburn hair escaping its bun in wild curls and her dress, once a respectable blue calico, now faded and stained from months of cooking over an open fire. "When did you last eat?" he asked, and the question was so unexpected that Nora could only stare at him. "I beg your pardon, you heard me. When did you last have a meal?" His eyes traveled over her face, taking in details she wished he would not notice. "You are swaying on your feet and your lips have no color. Those are signs of hunger, and I have seen enough of it to recognize the look." "That is none of your concern," Nora said, trying to inject some firmness into her voice. "I am perfectly fine. You are a poor liar." He turned away from the serving area and walked toward where Calloway stood talking with some of the supervisors. Nora watched in horror as the mountain man tapped the foreman on the shoulder, and when Calloway turned around, his face went pale. She could not hear what was being said, but she saw Calloway's expression shift from fear to anger to something like grudging acceptance. The mountain man's body language never changed. He simply stood there, radiating quiet menace, until Calloway nodded and scurried away like a rat fleeing a cat. Boone Farley returned to the serving area carrying a tin plate and cup. He walked past Nora into the cooking area itself, and she followed, confused and alarmed. "What are you doing? Mr. Calloway does not allow anyone back here." "I just had a talk with Mr. Calloway," Boone said, crouching down by the fire where a pot of beans still simmered. "He has agreed to some new arrangements." He began filling the plate with beans, then added several biscuits and some of the salt pork she had fried earlier. When the plate was full, he stood and held it out to her. "What is this?" Nora asked, though her stomach had already recognized the food and was twisting with desperate hunger. "This is your supper. Sit down and eat it." I do not. There is no arrangement for me to eat the camp food." "There is now." He pressed the plate into her hands, and the weight of it, the warmth of it, nearly brought tears to her eyes. "I have taken a job here as a hunting guide. Part of my payment is supplies and meals. I am choosing to share my meal with you. Calloway cannot say anything about that." "Why would you do this?" Nora whispered, staring down at the food. "Because I have been hungry before, and I would not wish it on anyone. Now sit down before you fall down and eat." Her pride wanted to refuse, but her body had other ideas. Nora sank down onto an overturned crate and, with shaking hands, picked up the spoon he offered. The first bite of beans nearly made her weep. She had cooked them herself, seasoning them the way her mother had taught her, but she had forgotten how good food could taste when you were truly hungry. She forced herself to eat slowly, knowing that her stomach, shrunken from lack of food, would rebel if she ate too quickly. Boone Farley did not leave. He stood nearby, his arms crossed over his broad chest, watching the camp with those keen gray eyes as if assessing everything and everyone. Nora studied him between bites, curiosity overcoming her natural reserve. "Why are you really here?" she asked after she had eaten half the plate. "Mountain men do not usually work in mining camps." "Winter is coming," he said simply. "Even a mountain man needs supplies and a bit of money to get through the cold months." The camp foreman was looking for someone who could hunt and knew the high country. I fit the requirements. And you just happened to notice that I was not eating. He turned those gray eyes on her, and there was something in them that made her heart beat faster. "I notice a lot of things. I notice that every man in that line got a full plate except you. I notice that you move like someone who is conserving energy because they do not have much left. And I notice that Calloway looks at you like you are property rather than a person. That bothers me." "It bothers a lot of people," Nora said bitterly, "but no one has done anything about it until now." "Well, I am doing something about it now. Tomorrow night I will bring fresh meat from my hunt. You will cook it, and you will eat the first plate. That is how it will work from now on. Mr. Calloway will never allow that." A slight smile tugged at the corner of Boone's mouth, transforming his severe features into something almost handsome. "Mr. Calloway will allow whatever I tell him to allow. I know things about his side business selling camp supplies, and he knows that I could make his life very difficult if he crosses me. You just focus on cooking and eating. I will handle Calloway." Nora wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that she did not need his protection or his charity, but the truth was that she did need it. She had been slowly starving, growing weaker each day, and she did not know how much longer she could have continued. This rough mountain man, this stranger who had walked into camp less than an hour ago, had done more for her than anyone had in months. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I do not know why you are helping me, but thank you." "You do not need to thank me for basic human decency," Boone replied. "Finish your food. You look like you could use every bite." She did finish it, scraping the plate clean and drinking the water he brought her. When she stood to begin cleaning up the cooking area, she felt steadier than she had in weeks. It was amazing what one full meal could do. Boone helped her carry water and clean the large pots, working with the ease of someone accustomed to camp chores. The other miners had dispersed to their tents and the saloon in town, leaving them alone in the gathering darkness. A cool September breeze came down from the mountains, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of the winter to come. "Where are you staying?" Nora asked as they finished the last of the cleanup. "I have a camp up in the woods above the mine. I prefer trees and fresh air to the crowded conditions down here." "That must be nice," Nora said wistfully. "I have a tent at the far edge of the camp near the creek. It is not much, but it is better than nothing." Boone frowned. "A tent? They have you sleeping in a tent?" "It is what I can afford with what they pay me. The boarding houses in town want more than I make in a month." She could see him processing this information, his jaw tightening with what looked like anger. "That will change," he said finally. "But for tonight, you should get some rest. You have been working on an empty stomach for too long. Your body needs time to recover." "I will. And Mr. Farley, truly thank you. Call me Boone. Mr. Farley was my father, and we did not get along well enough for me to want to share a name with him." Nora smiled, a real smile that felt strange after so many months of merely surviving. "Then you should call me Nora." "Nora." He said her name like he was testing the weight of it. "It suits you. I will see you tomorrow morning. I am heading out before dawn to hunt, but I will be back by supper time with fresh game." He walked away into the darkness, moving with that silent grace that seemed impossible for a man his size. Nora stood watching until she could no longer see him, then made her way to her tent. She crawled into her bedroll feeling more hopeful than she had in a very long time. And for the first time in months, she did not go to sleep with hunger gnawing at her insides. True to his word, Boone appeared the next morning just as dawn was breaking. Nora was already at work, preparing breakfast for the miners when she heard his footsteps. He carried a string of rabbits and a haunch of venison. "Good morning," he said, his breath misting in the cool mountain air. "I brought supplies for tonight. Where would you like me to put them?" "There is a cold box near the creek," Nora said, surprised that he had returned so quickly. "You can store them there until I am ready to prepare them." He nodded and disappeared in the direction she had indicated. When he returned, he stood by the fire warming his hands. Nora ladled out a bowl of porridge and handed it to him without a word. He looked at her questioningly. "You should eat before you start your day," she said simply. "You have a long day of hunting ahead. So do you. A long day of cooking." But he took the bowl and ate standing up, his eyes surveying the camp as it came to life. "Will you eat something too?" he asked when he was halfway through. Nora hesitated, then served herself a small portion. It felt strange, almost wrong, to eat breakfast after so many months of doing without. But Boone watched her with those keen eyes, and she knew he would say something if she did not eat. So she ate her porridge slowly, savoring every bite. They fell into a pattern over the following days. Boone would hunt in the high country during the day, returning by evening with fresh game. Nora would prepare it, along with the other food for the camp, and when everything was ready, Boone would fill 2 plates. He would hand her the first one, making sure she sat down and ate before he touched his own food. Then he would eat his portion and they would talk. At first, their conversations were simple things. He told her about the mountains, about the places he had been, and the things he had seen. She told him about Trinidad, about the people in town and the life of the mining camp. But as the days passed and September gave way to early October, their talks grew deeper and more personal. "Why did you come here?" Boone asked one evening as they sat by the fire after the supper cleanup was done. "A young woman like you should not be alone in a place like this." Nora stirred the embers with a stick, watching sparks fly up into the darkening sky. "My father was a miner. My mother died when I was 13, so it was just the 2 of us. He was all I had. When he died in a cave in last January, I had no family, no money, and no prospects. Mr. Calloway offered me this job, and I took it because I had no other choice." "You always have a choice," Boone said quietly. "Do you? When you are a woman alone with no education beyond basic reading and writing, with no skills except cooking, what choice do you have except to take what is offered?" He was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was softer than she had heard it before. "You are right. I spoke without thinking. I have always had the mountains. I could always walk away and survive on my own. You do not have that freedom." "No," Nora agreed. "I do not." "Tell me about your mother," Boone said, changing the subject with a gentleness that surprised her. "You mentioned she taught you to cook." Nora smiled, remembering. "She was wonderful, patient and kind, even when I burned the biscuits or oversalted the stew. She grew up in St. Louis in a house with servants and fine things. Then she met my father, a charming Irish miner who promised her adventure. Her family disowned her when she married him. I think she regretted leaving her old life sometimes, but she never regretted loving my father. She taught me that love was worth any sacrifice." "You believe that?" Boone asked, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. "I do not know," Nora admitted. "I have never been in love, but I saw how my parents were together. Even when we had nothing, even when my father came home covered in coal dust, and so tired he could barely stand, my mother would smile at him like he was the most wonderful thing in the world. And he looked at her the same way. If that is what love is, then yes, I suppose it is worth sacrificing for." "I think you are right about that," Boone said softly. and there was something in his expression that made Nora's heart skip. They talked long into the night, until the fire burned low and the cold drove them to seek their separate shelters. But Nora lay awake in her tent, thinking about the way Boone had looked at her in the firelight, and wondering if what she was beginning to feel for this quiet, strong mountain man could be the start of something like what her parents had shared. The next 2 weeks brought changes to the camp. Word had spread that Boone Farley had taken an interest in the cook's welfare, and Calloway's treatment of Nora improved markedly. She received a small raise and an additional blanket for her tent. It was not much, but it was more than she had before. The miners, too, began acknowledging her with nods and greetings, as if Boone's protection had made her visible to them. But it was the evenings Nora looked forward to most. Every night, Boone made sure she had the first plate of whatever was prepared. Every night, they would sit together after the work was done, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Kentucky, about a father who drank too much and a mother who died young. He told her about heading west at 16, about learning to survive in the mountains, about the freedom and loneliness of that life. She told him about her dreams, small as they seemed. She wanted a real home, not a tent or a boarding house room, but a place of her own. She wanted to cook because she loved it, not because she had to. She wanted to wake up in the morning and not feel afraid of what the day would bring. "Those are not small dreams," Boone said when she finished. "Those are the kinds of dreams worth fighting for." "But how does someone like me make dreams like that come true?" Nora asked, and she heard the hopelessness in her own voice. Boone reached across the space between them and took her hand. His hand was rough and calloused, warm and strong, and the touch sent a jolt through her whole body. "Maybe you do not have to do it alone," he said, his gray eyes intense in the firelight. "Maybe you have someone who wants to help make those dreams real." Nora's breath caught. "Boone, I do not understand what you are saying." "I think you do." He squeezed her hand gently. "I came to this camp planning to work through October, make some money, and head back to my winter cabin in the high country. But then I met you, and everything changed. I find myself thinking about you when I am supposed to be tracking game. I find myself hurrying back each evening, not for the food or the pay, but because I want to see you. I want to hear your voice and see you smile. I have been alone for a long time, Nora, by choice. But I do not want to be alone anymore, not if there is a chance you might feel the same way." Nora felt tears prick her eyes. "I do feel the same way. I think I have for weeks now, but I did not dare hope that you might want more than friendship. You could have any woman you wanted. Why would you choose someone like me? Someone like you?" Boone moved closer, still holding her hand. "You mean someone strong enough to survive what would have broken most people. Someone kind enough to put care into every meal even when she was starving. Someone with enough courage to keep going day after day even when everything was stacked against her. Nora, you are exactly the kind of woman I want, the only woman I want." He raised his free hand and gently brushed a curl back from her face. The touch was tender, reverent, and it made her shiver. "I am not good with fancy words," Boone continued. "I have spent more time with bears and elk than with people, but I know what I feel. I am falling in love with you, Nora Abbott. Maybe I have been since the first moment I saw you, swaying on your feet but still trying to keep your dignity. I want to take care of you. I want to make sure you never go hungry again. I want to give you that home you dream about. I want to wake up every morning and see your face. I want all of that if you will have me." Nora's tears spilled over, running down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will have you. I want all of that too. I think I have been falling in love with you since the moment you handed me that first plate of food and told me to eat. No one has ever taken care of me like that. No one has ever made me feel like I matter." "You matter," Boone said fiercely. You matter more than anything." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but Nora did not want to pull away. She wanted him, with an intensity that surprised her. When his lips met hers, it was gentle at first, a question and an answer all at once. Then the kiss deepened, and Nora felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she realized that for the first time in her life, she felt truly safe. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Boone rested his forehead against hers. "I have a cabin," he said quietly. "About 20 miles from here, high in the mountains. It is solid and warm, with a good fireplace and a loft for sleeping. I built it myself over the course of 2 summers. It is not fancy, but it is a real home. Come with me, Nora. Let me take you away from this place. We can leave as soon as I finish out my contract here at the end of October. We will have enough supplies to last the winter, and in the spring we can decide what comes next. But whatever comes, we will face it together." "I have never seen the high country," Nora said, smiling through her tears. "But I would go anywhere with you. Yes, Boone. Yes, I will come with you." He kissed her again, and this time there was a promise in it, a vow that needed no words. When he finally walked her to her tent that night, he held her hand the whole way, as if he could not bear to let her go. "Sleep well," he said at the entrance to her tent. "And tomorrow night, after you have served the first plate, I am going to sit down with you and we are going to eat together properly. I am tired of standing around watching you. I want to share meals with you the way couples do." "I would like that," Nora said softly. "I would like that very much." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of happiness that Nora had never imagined possible. True to his word, Boone began taking his meals with her, sitting on the ground by the fire and talking and laughing like they had been together for years, rather than weeks. The miners noticed the change in their relationship, and some of them congratulated Nora with genuine warmth. Others looked envious, but no one said anything unkind, at least not within Boone's hearing. Calloway kept his distance, which suited everyone fine. Boone had made it clear that Nora was under his protection, and the foreman was smart enough not to challenge a man who could break him in half without breaking a sweat. In quiet moments, stolen between Nora's work and Boone's hunting trips, they made plans. Boone described his cabin in detail, helping Nora picture the life they would build there. He talked about teaching her to fish in the creek that ran past the cabin, about the garden they could plant in the spring, about the simple, quiet life they would share. Nora, in turn, talked about the meals she would cook, about keeping the cabin warm and welcoming, about building something permanent and real together. "I never thought I would want to settle down with someone," Boone admitted one evening as they sat together after supper. "I always figured I was meant to be alone, but now I cannot imagine going back to that life. I do not want to be alone anymore, Nora. I want to be with you." "I never thought anyone would want me," Nora replied, leaning against his solid shoulder. "I thought I would spend my whole life just surviving, never really living, but you have given me hope. You have given me a future to look forward to." "We have given each other that," Boone corrected, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "I was just surviving too in my own way. Now I feel like I have a reason to build something better." On the last day of October, Boone collected his final pay from Calloway. Nora had already given her notice, such as it was, 2 weeks earlier. Calloway had tried to argue, claiming she owed him for room and board, but Boone had put an end to that discussion with a single cold look and a reminder about the supply thefts. The foreman had backed down immediately. The morning they were set to leave, several of the miners came to say goodbye. One of them, an older man named Henry, pressed a small bag of coins into Nora's hand. "From the boys," he said gruffly. "We took up a collection. We are sorry we did not do more to help you before. You always did right by us with the cooking, and we should have done right by you." Nora felt tears sting her eyes as she accepted the gift. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Boone had packed their supplies onto 2 sturdy mules he had purchased with his wages. He had also bought Nora a proper coat, thick and warm, and new boots to replace the ones that were falling apart. She wore them now as they prepared to leave, feeling like a different person than the desperate, starving girl who had arrived at this camp so many months ago. They set out just after dawn, heading up into the mountains. The trail was steep and narrow in places, but Boone navigated it with the ease of long practice. He set a manageable pace, stopping frequently to let Nora rest and to point out landmarks. "That peak there is called Fisher's Point," he said, indicating a distinctive rocky summit. "And down in that valley is where I usually see elk in the winter. The cabin is about another hour from here." When they finally arrived, Nora stood staring at the structure before her with wonder. It was larger than she had expected, built of stout logs chinked with clay. A stone chimney rose from one side, and there were real glass windows, small but intact. The roof looked solid, and there was a covered porch across the front. "You built this yourself?" she asked, awed. "Over 2 summers," Boone confirmed, looking pleased by her reaction. "I wanted something that would last. Come on, let me show you inside." The interior was simple but well made. There was a main room with a fireplace, a sturdy table and chairs, and shelves along one wall. A ladder led up to a loft where Boone slept. In one corner was a cook stove, a real iron stove, not just an open fire. "I traded furs for that stove last year," Boone explained. "Hauling it up here nearly killed me, but I figured it would be worth it eventually. I am glad now that I made the effort." "It is wonderful," Nora breathed. "All of it is wonderful." They spent the rest of the day unpacking and settling in. Boone showed her where he stored his supplies, where the creek was for water, where the root cellar was built into the hillside for keeping things cold. Everything was organized and practical. The work of a man who knew how to survive on his own, but who, Nora realized, had been hoping for something more. That night, Nora cooked their first meal in the cabin. She made a simple stew with dried vegetables and some of the venison Boone had smoked, along with biscuits baked in the iron stove. When it was ready, Boone filled 2 plates and handed her one, just as he had done every night since they met. "The first plate," he said with a soft smile. "Always." They ate together at the table, something that felt intimate and domestic in a way that made Nora's heart full. After they finished, Boone stood and pulled her to her feet. "Nora Abbott," he said formally, "I know we have not been together long, not by most people's standards. But I know my heart and I know what I want. I want you to be my wife. I want us to build a life together here in this cabin in these mountains. I want children with you when the time is right. I want to grow old with you. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Nora said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, Boone Farley. I will be your wife, and I will build a life with you, and I will love you for all the days I have." He lifted her off her feet in a fierce embrace, spinning her around in the small cabin. When he set her down, he kissed her with a passion that made her dizzy. They stood there in the firelight, holding each other, and Nora knew that this was what her mother had meant. This was the kind of love worth any sacrifice, worth any hardship. This was the kind of love that made everything else fade away. "We will have to go into Trinidad in the spring to find a preacher," Boone said eventually, still holding her close. "But as far as I am concerned, we are married now in every way that matters. You are mine and I am yours." "In every way that matters," Nora agreed. That night, she climbed the ladder to the loft and slipped into Boone's arms. They lay together in the darkness, talking softly about their future, about all the things they would do together. When they finally fell silent, Nora felt Boone's breathing slow and deepen as he drifted off to sleep, but she stayed awake a little longer, marveling at the turn her life had taken. 2 months ago, she had been starving and alone, with no hope and no future. Now she was here, in the arms of a man who loved her, in a home that felt more real than anywhere she had ever lived. It seemed like a miracle, but it was not magic. It was simply the result of one man's kindness, of his willingness to see her suffering and do something about it. That kindness had grown into something deeper, something that would sustain them both through whatever challenges lay ahead. Winter came to the high country with a fury that Nora had never experienced in the lower elevations. Snow fell in heavy blankets, covering everything in white. The temperature dropped until even the inside of the cabin was cold in the mornings before Boone got the fire going. But Nora found that she did not mind. The cabin was snug and well built, the supplies were plentiful, and she had Boone. They fell into an easy rhythm. Boone would check his trap lines every few days, bringing back rabbit and marten pelts that he would cure for trading in the spring. Nora cooked and kept the cabin clean, and experimented with the limited ingredients they had, finding new ways to make their supplies interesting. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, and Boone taught her to read the tracks and signs that animals left behind, while she taught him some of the songs her mother had sung to her as a child. They talked endlessly, learning every detail about each other. Boone told her about the scars on his body, each one with a story. The long one on his left arm was from a mountain lion. The puckered mark on his shoulder was from a bullet, a hunting accident years ago. The smaller scars on his hands were from 100 different wilderness incidents. Nora told him about her childhood, about the good times before her mother got sick, about the struggle after. She told him about her fears and her hopes, about the person she wanted to become. "You are already that person," Boone told her one night as they lay together in the loft. "You are strong and capable and brave. You just needed someone to see it and believe in you." "You saw it," Nora whispered. "You believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself." "I will always believe in you," Boone promised, pulling her closer. "And I will always make sure you have the first plate. You will never go hungry again, not as long as I am alive to prevent it." True to his word, Boone always filled her plate first, whether it was breakfast, lunch, or supper. It became a ritual between them, a symbol of his care and devotion. And Nora, who had spent so many months watching others eat while she starved, never took it for granted. Every meal was a gift, every bite a reminder of how far she had come and how much she was loved. Christmas came, and though they had no decorations or gifts, they celebrated together. Nora made a special meal with some of the dried fruits Boone had packed, creating a sweet bread that reminded her of her mother's holiday cooking. Boone surprised her with a pair of mittens he had made from soft rabbit fur, stitched together with careful precision. "I am not good at sewing," he admitted as she tried them on, "but I wanted you to have something special." "They are perfect," Nora said, throwing her arms around his neck. "You are perfect." "I am far from perfect," Boone said with a laugh, "but I am trying to be the man you deserve." "You already are that man," Nora assured him. As winter deepened into January and February, they grew even closer. The isolation of the mountain cabin meant they had only each other for company, but neither of them minded. They were building something solid and real, a partnership based on mutual respect and deepening love. One evening in late February, as a blizzard howled outside, Nora sat at the table working on a shirt she was making for Boone. He was at the fire, working on a new knife sheath. The comfortable silence between them was broken when Nora suddenly spoke. "I think I am with child," she said quietly. Boone's hands stilled on the leather. He looked up at her, his gray eyes wide. You think or you know. I am almost certain. I have all the signs my mother told me about. I think the baby will come in late summer or early autumn. Boone set aside his work and crossed to her in 2 long strides. He knelt beside her chair and took her hands in his. A baby, he said wonderingly. Our baby. Are you happy? Nora asked, suddenly uncertain. They had talked about children, but in an abstract, someday kind of way. She had not expected it to happen so quickly. Happy. Boone's face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen from him. Nora, I am more than happy. I am overjoyed, terrified but overjoyed. He leaned forward and kissed her gently. We are going to have a family. We are going to have a family, Nora repeated, and suddenly it was real in a way it had not been before. They were not just 2 people surviving together. They were building something lasting, something that would extend beyond themselves. We need to get you to a doctor, Boone said, immediately practical. And we need to make sure you are eating enough, getting enough rest. Boone, I am fine. Women have babies all the time without doctors. Not my woman, Boone said firmly. Not if I can help it. As soon as the snow clears enough to travel, we are going down to Trinidad. We will find a doctor and we will get properly married by a preacher while we are there. I want everything official before the baby comes. Nora wanted to argue that it was not necessary, that they were fine as they were, but she could see the determination in his face. This was important to him, making things legal and proper. And truth be told, it was important to her too. She wanted their child to be born legitimate without any questions or complications. All right, she agreed. As soon as the weather allows, we will go to Trinidad. The thaw came in late March, and as soon as the trails were passable, they made the journey down to Trinidad. It took 2 days, with an overnight stop at a way station halfway down the mountain. The town had not changed much in the month since Nora had left, but she felt like a completely different person as she walked down the main street on Boone's arm. They found a doctor first, an older man named Dr. Abernathy, who examined Nora and confirmed what she already knew. She was about 3 months along, healthy, and the baby seemed fine. He gave her advice about what to expect and what to eat, and told her to come back in a few months for another check. Next, they went to the small church at the end of town. The minister, Reverend Matthews, was a kind-faced man in his 50s who listened to their story without judgment. He agreed to marry them that very afternoon, with his wife and the doctor standing as witnesses. Nora wore a simple blue dress that she had made during the long winter months. It was not fancy, but it was clean and new, and it made her feel like a proper bride. Boone wore his best buckskins, his dark hair pulled back, his beard neatly trimmed. He looked impossibly handsome, and when he took her hand and spoke his vows in that deep, rumbling voice, Nora felt tears slide down her cheeks. I, Boone Farley, take you, Nora Abbott, to be my lawful wedded wife. I promise to love you, protect you, and provide for you all the days of my life. I promise that you will always have the first plate, that you will never go hungry or cold or unloved. I promise to be faithful and true in good times and bad, for as long as we both shall live. Nora repeated her own vows, her voice shaking with emotion. I, Nora Abbott, take you, Boone Farley, to be my lawful wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and stand beside you all the days of my life. I promise to make our home a place of warmth and comfort, to raise our children with love and care, and to be faithful and true in good times and bad, for as long as we both shall live. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them man and wife, Boone kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart swell. They were married, truly married, and they were going to have a baby. Her life, which had seemed so bleak just months ago, was now full of promise and hope. They spent one more night in Trinidad, staying at the boarding house that had once been beyond Nora's means. In the morning, they purchased additional supplies, including fabric for baby clothes and a few medical supplies that Dr. Abernathy recommended. Then they began the long journey back to the cabin. As they climbed higher into the mountains, Nora felt a sense of homecoming that surprised her. The cabin, isolated and remote as it was, had become home. It was where she belonged, with Boone by her side and their child growing inside her. Spring turned to summer, and Nora's belly grew round with the baby. Boone was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worrying about her doing too much or not resting enough. He took over many of the household chores, insisting that she save her strength. Nora found it both endearing and frustrating, but she knew it came from love, so she indulged him. They spent the warm months preparing for the baby. Boone built a cradle from smooth pine, sanding it until there were no rough edges. Nora sewed tiny gowns and blankets, using the fabric they had brought from Trinidad. They argued playfully about names, with Boone favoring strong, traditional names, and Nora preferring something a bit more unusual. "If it is a boy, we could call him Benjamin," Boone suggested one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Benjamin Farley," Nora tested the name. "I like it. And if it is a girl?" "I was thinking perhaps Clara, after my mother." "Clara is beautiful," Nora agreed. "Clara or Benjamin, either way they will be loved." "More than anything in this world," Boone said, resting his hand on her swollen belly. "Except for their mother. Nothing will ever be loved more than you, Nora. You make me feel like the luckiest woman alive," Nora said softly. "I never imagined I could be this happy." "You deserve every bit of happiness," Boone replied. "You deserve the world, and I wish I could give it to you." "You have given me everything I need," Nora assured him. "A home, love, a family. What more could I possibly want?" As summer waned and autumn approached, Nora began to feel the first signs that the baby would come soon. They made one more trip down to Trinidad in late August, this time bringing Dr. Abernathy back with them to the cabin. The elderly doctor was willing to make the journey for a generous fee, and Boone paid it without hesitation. "I am not taking any chances with you or the baby," he told Nora firmly. "Dr. Abernathy will stay until the baby is born and you are both well." The doctor ended up staying for 2 weeks, though Nora privately thought it was unnecessary. But she could not deny it gave Boone peace of mind, and Dr. Abernathy was good company, telling stories of his years as a frontier doctor and teaching both of them more about what to expect during the birth. Labor began on a cool September evening, almost exactly a year after Nora and Boone had first met in the mining camp. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Nora thought she could not endure another minute of pain. But Boone stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth and whispering encouragement. "You can do this," he told her over and over. "You are the strongest person I know. You can do anything." Finally, just before dawn, their son was born. Dr. Abernathy placed the squalling infant in Nora's arms, and she looked down at the tiny red face with wonder. "He is perfect," she whispered. "He is beautiful," Boone agreed, his voice thick with emotion, "just like his mother." They named him Benjamin as they had discussed. Benjamin Farley, born September 24, 1879, in a cabin high in the Colorado Rockies to parents who loved him more than life itself. Dr. Abernathy stayed for another week to make sure both mother and baby were doing well, then accepted his pay and began the journey back to Trinidad. Boone walked him part of the way down the mountain, returning by afternoon with a huge smile on his face. "He said you and Benjamin are both healthy and strong," Boone reported. "He also said we make a fine family." "We do we not?" Nora said, looking down at Benjamin sleeping in her arms. "I never thought I would have this. A husband who loves me, a beautiful baby, a real home. I never thought I would have it either," Boone admitted. "I thought I would die alone in these mountains, an old mountain man with no one to mourn him. But then I walked into that mining camp and saw you, and everything changed." "We saved each other," Nora said softly. "You saved me from starving, and I saved you from loneliness." "I guess we did," Boone agreed. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, then gently touched Benjamin's soft cheek. "And now we have him. Our family is complete." But their family was not quite complete yet. 18 months later, in the spring of 1881, Nora gave birth to a daughter they named Clara, after Boone's mother. She had Boone's gray eyes and Nora's auburn hair, and she was as fierce and strong-willed as her parents combined. The cabin, which had once seemed spacious for two, now felt full of life with two young children. Boone built an addition, adding a small bedroom off the main room so Benjamin could have his own space as he grew older. He also expanded the garden, knowing they would need more food to feed their growing family. Nora had never been happier. She spent her days cooking, cleaning, caring for the children, and working in the garden. It was hard work, but it was work she chose, work she did for people she loved. And every single day, without fail, Boone filled her plate first before serving himself. "Will you ever stop doing that?" she asked him one evening, laughing as he handed her a full plate while his own sat empty. "Never," Boone said firmly. "I promised you that you would always have the first plate, and I meant it. That promise is for life, Nora." "You are impossible," she said affectionately. "I am devoted," he corrected. "There is a difference." The years passed quickly, marked by the changing of the seasons and the growth of their children. Benjamin grew into a strong, serious boy who idolized his father and wanted to learn everything about tracking and hunting. Clara was more like Nora, with a love of cooking and a gentle way with animals. They were good children, happy children, raised with love and security in the isolated mountain cabin. Sometimes Nora thought about the girl she had been in the mining camp, starving and hopeless. It seemed like a lifetime ago, like a story that had happened to someone else. But then she would catch Boone watching her with that soft expression in his gray eyes, and she would remember how far they had both come. By the time Benjamin was 10 and Clara was 8, they had established a pattern of going down to Trinidad twice a year in spring and fall, for supplies, and to sell the furs Boone had trapped. The children loved these trips, fascinated by the town and the people, though they were always eager to return to the mountains and the cabin. On one such trip, in the fall of 1889, they were walking down the main street of Trinidad when Nora heard someone call her name. She turned to see a woman she vaguely recognized from her time in the mining camp. "Nora Abbott, is that really you?" "It is Nora Farley now," Nora corrected with a smile. "But yes, it is me." The woman, whose name Nora remembered as Sarah, looked her up and down in amazement. "I cannot believe it. You look so different, so healthy and happy. We heard you ran off with that mountain man, but some people said you had probably died up in those mountains. I am so glad to see that is not true." "Very much not true," Nora agreed. "This is my husband, Boone, and our children, Benjamin and Clara." Sarah greeted them all, then leaned in closer to Nora. "I am so happy for you. You deserve this happiness after what you went through at that camp. Did you hear what happened to Calloway?" "No, what?" "The mining company found out about his stealing and fired him. Last I heard, he was working as a stock boy in Denver. Lost everything." Nora felt a moment of satisfaction, though she did not dwell on it. Calloway and that whole period of her life felt like ancient history. She had moved on to better things. They said goodbye to Sarah and continued with their errands. That night, as they camped on the trail back to the cabin, Nora lay in Boone's arms and reflected on the encounter. "You ever regret it?" she asked quietly, so as not to wake the children sleeping nearby. "Taking me away from civilization. We could have stayed in Trinidad, built a life there." "You regret it," Boone countered. "Not for a single moment. I love our life. I love our home. I love you and the children more than anything. But I wonder sometimes if you might have been happier with a different kind of woman, someone who belonged in your mountain world from the start." Boone pulled her closer. "You belong in my mountain world because you belong with me. There is no other woman I would have wanted, Nora. You are my perfect match. You were strong enough to survive the worst and brave enough to take a chance on a rough mountain man who did not have much to offer except his love. Your love is everything," Nora whispered. "It has always been everything." They made love under the stars, quietly so as not to wake the children, and afterward, Nora felt more at peace than ever. This was her life, her real life, and it was better than any dream she could have imagined. The years continued to pass. Benjamin grew into a young man, strong and capable like his father. At 18, he announced his intention to marry a girl from Trinidad named Mary, the daughter of the local blacksmith. Boone and Nora gave their blessing, and the wedding took place in the same church where Boone and Nora had married years before. Clara, at 16, had suitors lining up, but she was in no hurry to marry. She loved the mountain life, and had announced that if she ever did marry, it would be to someone willing to live in the high country like her father. Boone and Nora, now in their late 30s, had settled into a comfortable middle age. Boone's dark hair was starting to show threads of gray, and Nora had laugh lines around her eyes, but they were as in love as ever. Every evening, without fail, Boone filled Nora's plate first, a ritual that had become so ingrained that their children did the same for their own guests. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching another spectacular mountain sunset, Clara inside preparing supper and Benjamin visiting with his wife in town, Nora turned to Boone with a contented smile. "You remember the night we met?" she asked. "Every detail," Boone replied. "You were swaying on your feet, trying to stay upright. You looked like a strong wind would blow you over, but you still had dignity and pride in your eyes. I knew right then that you were someone special. I remember thinking you were the biggest, most intimidating man I had ever seen. I was a little afraid of you at first." "At first," Boone grinned. "You mean you are not afraid of me now?" Terrified, Nora teased. "Especially when you refuse to let me serve myself at meals." "Old habits," Boone said, his expression growing more serious. "I never want you to forget what it felt like to be cared for, to be cherished. The first plate is my way of showing you that every single day." "I could never forget," Nora said softly. "You showed me what love really means, Boone. You saved my life, and then you gave me a life worth living. I will be grateful for that until the day I die." "You gave me just as much," Boone insisted. "You gave me a purpose beyond just surviving. You gave me a family and a reason to build something lasting. We saved each other, Nora. That is the truth of it." Clara called them in for supper, and they rose together, hand in hand, and walked into the warm, welcoming cabin. The table was set, the food smelled delicious, and Clara was already filling the plates. But she paused and handed the first plate to Boone, who smiled and handed it to Nora, just as he had done every night for more than a decade. "The first plate," he said, as he always did. "The first plate," Nora agreed, accepting it with the same gratitude she had felt that first night in the mining camp. They sat down to eat, their daughter joining them, and the conversation flowed easily. They talked about Benjamin's new life with his wife, about the possibility of grandchildren in the near future, about the coming winter and the preparations they needed to make. It was ordinary talk, the kind of conversation families had been having around dinner tables for generations. But to Nora, it was precious beyond measure. After supper, when Clara had gone up to the loft and they had the main room to themselves, Boone pulled Nora into his arms. "I love you," he said simply. "I loved you when you were starving in that camp. I loved you when you were pregnant and glowing with our children. I loved you when you were up all night with a sick baby. I loved you every single day of our life together, and I will love you every day until I take my last breath." "I love you too," Nora replied, her eyes bright with tears. "You are my heart, Boone Farley. You always will be." He kissed her then, a kiss that held all the years of their marriage, all the struggles they had overcome, all the joy they had shared. When they finally pulled apart, they stood together in the firelight. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life together that was worth more than all the gold in the Colorado mountains. Years later, when they were old and gray, surrounded by grandchildren who had never known hunger or fear, Nora would still remember that first night in the mining camp. She would remember the mountain man who had noticed her suffering and decided to do something about it. She would remember the first plate he handed her and the promise implicit in that gesture. He had promised to take care of her, to make sure she never went hungry again, and he had kept that promise every single day of their life together. The first plate. Such a simple thing, really. But it had changed everything. It had been the beginning of a love story that would last a lifetime, the foundation of a family that would grow and flourish in the high country, the symbol of a devotion that never wavered. Benjamin had children, 3 sons and 2 daughters, who loved visiting their grandparents in the mountain cabin. Clara eventually married a fur trapper named Thomas, who was willing to build a cabin near her parents so she would not have to leave the mountains she loved. The Farley family grew and prospered, known throughout Trinidad and the surrounding areas as good, solid people who worked hard and loved fiercely. Boone continued to trap and hunt well into his 60s, though he stayed closer to home as he aged, not wanting to be away from Nora for long periods. Nora continued to cook, teaching her daughters-in-law and granddaughters the recipes her mother had taught her, and the new ones she had developed over years of mountain living. And every single night, without exception, Boone filled her plate first. The grandchildren noticed, of course, and asked about it. Boone would tell them the story of how he met their grandmother, how she had been starving, and how he had promised her that she would always have the first plate. The children would listen wide-eyed, finding it hard to imagine their strong, capable grandmother as a starving girl in a mining camp. "Your grandmother is the bravest person I have ever known," Boone would tell them. "She survived things that would have broken most people, and she came through it with her kindness and her grace intact. She deserved to be cherished, and I have tried to do that every day since I met her." "You have succeeded," Nora would always say when she heard this speech. "You have more than succeeded." On a cool September evening in 1910, 32 years after they had first met, Boone and Nora sat on their porch watching yet another sunset. Their children and grandchildren had been visiting for Benjamin's birthday, but they had all returned to their own homes, leaving the old couple alone in the cabin once more. 32 years, Nora mused. It feels like a lifetime and like no time at all. "The best 32 years of my life," Boone said. His hair was completely gray now and his body had the stiffness of age, but his eyes were still that same piercing gray, and his love for Nora had never dimmed. "Mine too," Nora agreed. "I would not change a single day of it." "Not even the hard parts, not even those," Nora confirmed. "The hard parts made us stronger. They taught us what we were capable of, and they made the good parts sweeter." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun sink below the distant peaks. Finally, Boone stood and offered Nora his hand. "Come on, Mrs. Farley. Let us go inside and have some supper. I am hungry." "So am I," Nora said, taking his hand and letting him pull her to her feet. Inside, she prepared a simple meal of soup and bread. When it was ready, Boone filled 2 bowls. He handed the first one to Nora with a smile. "The first plate," he said, as he had said thousands of times before. "The first plate," Nora echoed, accepting it with a heart full of love and gratitude. They sat down together to eat, an old couple in a mountain cabin, still deeply in love after more than 3 decades together. Outside, the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Inside, the fire crackled on the hearth, and the cabin was warm and welcoming. This was their life. This was their love story. It had started with an act of simple kindness, with a mountain man who saw a starving woman and decided to help. It had grown into something beautiful and lasting, a marriage built on mutual respect, deep affection, and unwavering devotion. The first plate. Every night, for 32 years and for all the years still to come. It was Boone's promise to Nora, a promise he had kept faithfully, a promise that symbolized everything their love meant. She would never go hungry again. She would always be cherished. She would always have the first plate. And as they finished their meal and prepared for bed, climbing the ladder to the loft where they had slept together for so many years, Nora knew that she was the luckiest woman alive. She had been the cook who never got to eat, but a mountain man had made sure she had the first plate every night. And in doing so, he had given her so much more than food. He had given her love, security, family, and a life beyond her wildest dreams. The years continued to roll by, bringing changes and challenges as all years do. Boone's strength began to fade as he entered his 70s, though his spirit remained as fierce as ever. Nora, too, felt the weight of age, her hands growing stiff and her movements slower. But they faced these changes together, as they had faced everything else. Their children worried about them living alone in the isolated cabin, but Boone refused to leave. This was his home, the place he had built with his own hands, the place where he had raised his family. He would die here, he said, when his time came, and not in some town far from the mountains he loved. Nora understood. She felt the same way. This cabin, this mountain, this life they had built together was precious beyond words. She would not trade it for anything, not even the comfort and convenience of living closer to their children. On a clear autumn morning in 1918, 40 years after they had first met, Boone woke with a strange feeling in his chest. He did not mention it to Nora, not wanting to worry her, but she noticed his pallor and the way he moved more carefully than usual. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice sharp with concern. "I am fine," he assured her, "just feeling my age." But as the day progressed, he grew weaker. By evening, he could not deny that something was seriously wrong. Nora wanted to send for a doctor, but Boone refused. "It is my time," he said simply. "I have had a good life, a long life. I am ready." "I am not ready," Nora said fiercely, tears streaming down her face. "I need more time with you." "We need more time." "We have had 40 years," Boone said gently, reaching up to touch her face. 40 years more than I ever thought I would have with anyone. You gave me a beautiful life, Nora. You gave me love and family and purpose. I could not ask for anything more." "Please do not leave me," Nora begged, holding his hand tightly. "I will never truly leave you," Boone promised. "My body might give out, but my love for you will endure forever. And I will be waiting for you when your time comes. We will be together again." He paused, breathing heavily, then managed a weak smile. "I am sorry I will not be able to give you the first plate tonight." Nora let out a sob that was half laugh, half cry. You have given me the first plate for 40 years. I think I can manage one night without it." 40 years, Boone murmured. Best 40 years anyone could ask for. Those were his last words. His breathing slowed, became shallow, and then stopped altogether. Nora sat beside him, holding his hand, crying silently as the man she loved slipped away from her. Their children came, alerted by a neighbor who had been checking on the elderly couple. They mourned their father, a man who had been strong and protective, who had taught them to love the mountains and to value family above all else. They tried to convince Nora to come live with one of them, but she refused. "I will stay here," she said firmly. "This is my home. This is where I lived with your father, where we raised you children. I will not leave it now." They reluctantly agreed, promising to visit frequently and to make sure she had everything she needed. Nora lived on in the cabin for 3 more years. She was not lonely, exactly. Her children and grandchildren visited often, and she kept herself busy with cooking and tending the garden. But she missed Boone with an ache that never quite faded. She missed his quiet presence, his steady strength, the way he had always made sure she had the first plate. She continued the tradition, even alone. When she cooked her meals, she would fill a plate and say quietly, "The first plate." It was her way of keeping Boone's memory alive, of honoring the promise he had kept for so many years. On a September evening in 1921, exactly 43 years after that night in the mining camp when a mountain man had first handed her a plate of food and changed her life forever, Nora Abbott Farley passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 71 years old. Her children found her the next morning, looking serene and at peace. On the table was a single plate of food, untouched. They understood immediately what she had been doing. She was saying goodbye to Father, Clara said quietly, telling him she was coming home to him. They buried her beside Boone in a small cemetery in Trinidad, under a simple stone that bore both their names and a single inscription: "Together forever, as we always were." The cabin remained in the family, passed down through the generations. It became a place of pilgrimage for the descendants of Boone and Nora, a reminder of where their family had begun. The story of the cook who never got to eat and the mountain man who made sure she had the first plate every night became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It was a story about kindness and compassion, about seeing someone suffering and choosing to help. It was a story about love that grew from simple acts of care into something deep and lasting. It was a story about promises kept and devotion that endured through decades of marriage and beyond death itself. The first plate. Such a simple gesture, but it had meant everything. It had been the beginning of a love story that spanned 40 years and produced a family that would continue for generations. It had been a promise of care and protection, a daily reminder that Nora was valued and cherished. It had been the foundation on which a life was built. And in the mountain cabin where Boone and Nora had lived and loved, where they had raised their children and welcomed their grandchildren, the memory of that promise lived on. Future generations would sit at the same table where Boone had handed Nora her first plate 40 years earlier, and they would remember the story of their ancestors. They would remember the cook who never got to eat and the mountain man who made sure she never went hungry again. They would remember that love could begin with a single act of kindness and grow into something that would echo through eternity. The story of Boone and Nora Farley became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of compassion, to the strength that comes from partnership, and to the enduring nature of true love. It was a reminder that sometimes the most profound connections begin with the simplest gestures, and that a life built on mutual care and respect could weather any storm. In the end, they had saved each other. Boone had saved Nora from starvation and given her a life worth living. Nora had saved Boone from loneliness and given him a family and a purpose beyond mere survival. Together, they had created something beautiful in the harsh mountain wilderness, a love that was as strong and enduring as the peaks that surrounded their home. The first plate, given every night without fail for 40 years, was the symbol of that love. It represented care, devotion, and the sacred promise to always put the other person first. It was a gesture so simple that anyone could do it, yet so meaningful that it had sustained a marriage through 4 decades of life in the wild, rugged Colorado mountains. And now, more than a century later, when someone asks about the old cabin in the high country, the descendants of Boone and Nora Farley still tell the story. They tell about the cook who never got to eat and the mountain man who made sure she had the first plate every night. They tell about a love that began with compassion and grew into something eternal. They tell about a promise kept faithfully until death and beyond. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West of 1878, nurtured in a mountain cabin far from civilization, and remembered forever by those who came after. It was proof that true love, the kind that lasts, is built not on grand gestures but on daily acts of kindness and care. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with someone simply noticing another person's suffering and deciding to do something about it. The first plate, the promise, the love. These were the legacy of Boone and Nora Farley, a legacy that would endure as long as there were people to remember them and mountains, to stand watch over the place where they had loved and lived and built their life together.